Excuse me! Taxi!
This is the 77 WABC minicast.
History, and history was made about 1 year into the Biden administration by the great, independent, and brave journalist James Rosen. Check this out.
I'd like to raise a delicate subject, but with utmost respect for your life accomplishments and the high office you hold. A poll released this morning by Politico Morning Consult found 49% of registered voters disagreeing with the statement, Joe Biden is mentally fit. Wow. Not even a majority of Democrats who responded strongly affirmed that statement.
Well, I'll let you all make the judgment whether they're correct.
Well, so the question I have for you, sir, if you'd let me finish, is why do you suppose such large segments of the American electorate have come to harbor such profound concerns about your cognitive fitness? Thank you.
I have no idea.
Well, he'd figure it out a couple of years later. That question needed to be asked, and James Rosen paid quite a price for paying it, but he has been vindicated yet once again. He is a great journalist and author. His new book, Scalia, Supreme Court Years, 1986 to 2001, is out now, about the great justice on the Supreme Court. Welcome back, James Rosen. How are you?
It's so good to be with you, my friend. Thank you, Greg.
That was quite a moment, huh? That was quite a moment. How did you get that follow-up in? How did you feel in that moment?
You're talking about the question of President Biden on January 19, 2022, where I asked about the mounting concerns surrounding his cognitive fitness. And that was the first time anyone had done so, and it was the only time anyone did so for about another 2+ years, and in which time I was blackballed heavily inside the White House by the press operation in the form of Jen Psaki and then Karine Jean-Pierre, these bygone names, where they wouldn't let me ask a question in the White House press briefing room for 8 months or so. Then there would be some relent, and then it would be another 10 months, and then the final 14 months of the administration, I didn't get a question in the briefing room, and I was sitting there in an assigned Newsmax seat every day. I was made to feel by my colleagues, the other members of the White House press corps, as though I had asked a fringy or rude question. And in fact, on MSNBC, Joe Scarborough said, I think the Newsmax guy asked about aliens. And now we, of course, with the benefit of hindsight and the 2024 debate between President Biden and former President Trump, can tell that this was not some fringe question about aliens, but in fact hitting at the heart of the defining issue of Mr. Biden's presidency.
Well, he couldn't answer the question, and he couldn't write a book like this. This book is incredible, critically acclaimed. It's so scholarly yet readable. Scalia, Supreme Court Years, 86 to 2001. Why did you pick Antonin Scalia?
Well, he was born in New Jersey, but he grew up on in Queens, Long Island, in New York City, and I was born in Brooklyn and raised on Staten Island, so we share a kind of outer borough sarcasm and in-your-face attitude. I was watching him on television on PBS in the 80s when I was in high school, and I could tell at a glance, even though he was surrounded by other eminent minds like Dan Rather and Gerald Ford and these sort of PBS hypothetical debate programs in a theater in the round setting, that he was fundamentally unlike all the rest with his humor, his biting sarcasm. When I got to Fox News and came to Washington as a young correspondent in 1999, Fox at that time had nobody covering the Supreme Court. So I wrote him a letter, and he wrote back. And we started this hilarious correspondence, which is published in this book, Scalia's Supreme Court Years, 1986-2001. And we went to lunch twice, where we knocked back a bottle of wine together, and he made me eat vegetables off his plate. The contents of the lunches are off the record, but I was permitted by the Scalia family, enforcing that rule, with justification, to describe some atmospheric moments of the lunch. As when he arrived, I got there first, and this is a dumpy Italian restaurant where they had plastic grapes on the wall. This had been his watering hole for 30 years. This was 1999. I'm 30 years old. I'm not a lawyer. I'm up against one of the towering intellects of our time and just trying to hold my own. And he shows up, and he had a sort of Jackie Gleason grandiloquence about him, and he says to the waiter, "Polpi, what is Polpi?" And the waiter's a young Italian guy, barely spoke English, and he says, "Octopus." And he goes, "Octopus, I'll have the Polpi." And he hands the menu back with a great flourish. And then I say, I did not want to eat anything with my hands. I did not want to eat anything that would splatter sauce on him or me. So I decided, coming from Staten Island, which is 2/3 Italian, I knew just what to order. And I said to the guy, I'll have the veal parmesan, please. Easily manipulable with knife and fork, Greg. And he's writing it down, and Justice Scalia just interrupts and goes, no, give him the rabbit. And the waiter and I look at him in unison, and we say, rabbit. And he goes, yeah, you're going to like the rabbit. Give him the rabbit. And the guy disappears. Now, I had never had rabbit in my life. I did not want rabbit. I was kind of grossed out by the thought of having rabbit. I was so inexperienced with it that I wondered if, like, certain servings of fish, it actually comes with the head still attached. I didn't know what the heck it was going to be. But the amusing point in this is that here you have Antonin Scalia, towering intellect, a hugely influential justice of the Supreme Court, and the country's foremost opponent of judicial activism, intervening to overrule my lunch order, which not even Mrs. Rosen does. This is a chapter in the book called The Rabbit.
That's awesome. That is so great. Wow. So it's not just briefs and filings and arguments.
This is written for non-lawyers, and the book is frequently funny as hell because Justice Scalia was funny as hell. And it gets into his relationships with the other justices, the long, long rupture between him and Sandra Day O'Connor after he wrote in one of the abortion cases that her writings in that case, quote, cannot be taken seriously. There's his relationship with Clarence Thomas, how he's the justice after Clarence Thomas's extraordinary, bitter, and ugly ordeal to secure confirmation to the court. It's Antonin Scalia who gives him a hand up and says to him, welcome, and how they became brothers for life, and what an extraordinary relationship they had. So there's a lot of human element to the book. It covers the first half of Justice Scalia's tenure on the Supreme Court. The first volume, which came out 3 years ago, was Scalia Rise to Greatness. This is Scalia's Supreme Court years 86 to 01. It takes you from his first day on the bench up to and including the outcome in the national trauma of Bush v. Gore.
Wow. I want everybody to hear Antonin Scalia, what he sounded like. And this is not in a restaurant setting, but I think he's on the high court. And here he is in action. He's about to jump in. Go ahead, if you don't mind, Carlos, with Antonin Scalia. You got that little clip ready? You make sure. Yeah, you sure you do. Hit it, please.
Certainly not the case with
there are those who contend that it does not benefit African Americans to get them into the University of Texas where they do not do well, as opposed to having them go to a less advanced school, a slower track school where they do well. One of the briefs pointed out that most of the black scientists in this country don't come from schools like the University of Texas.
So this court
come from lesser schools where they do not feel that they're being pushed ahead in classes that are too fast for them.
Well, James, right there, unlike a lot of the other justices, I can understand what he's saying. Is that a feature, or is this just a particularly clear moment?
So when Scalia got to the Supreme Court, he had just served 4 years on the D.C. Circuit Court of Appeals, which is often described as the second most powerful court in the United States because its docket so heavily shapes the work of the Supreme Court, and the justices are so often plucked from the ranks of the D.C. Circuit. And when he was sitting on that court, he had as his colleagues in robes Ruth Bader Ginsburg, Robert Bork, Larry Silberman, Kenneth Starr, James Buckley, like a real murderer's row of judicial talent from across the aisle. And on that D.C. Circuit Court, the Court of Appeals, the judges rule in groups of 3 on cases. It's very intimate and collegial. And he loved that. And he loved kibitzing with his other fellow judges on the Court of Appeals. And he loved bantering back and forth and debating the cases and stopping by chambers. When he gets to the Supreme Court, he gets a very rude awakening that that's not how it works at the Marble Palace. And he's informed in very distinct terms that he is not welcome to just drop by the chambers of the other justices. They prefer that he communicate in memos. And where the conferences are concerned, these are the closed-door meetings where it's just the justices themselves, usually 2 days after they've heard oral argument in a case. And Chief Justice Rehnquist, who had been on the court for 15 years and who suffered under the long-winded perorations of the previous Chief Justice, Warren Burger, was determined that conferences were going to be run very briskly. You go around the room in order of seniority, and each justice tells how they're going to vote on the case and give 1 or 2 sentences of exposition. And Scalia, who's the new justice, felt that he had no opportunity to persuade his colleagues. And so he called it a locked vault. but he redirected himself like a mighty river to the one area, the one element in the Supreme Court's process of deciding cases that's open to the public, and that is oral argument. And there he shone, and he very quickly became the most frequent questioner in oral argument. He was the first law professor to be appointed to the Supreme Court in some 50 years.